We have some breaking news stories tonight involving the investigation of Russian interference in our presidential election in favor of the Trump campaign. The Washington Post is reporting tonight that the Russian interference in the election, which was designed to help the Trump campaign, may be paying off very soon. The Post reports the Trump administration is moving toward handing back to Russia 2 diplomatic compounds near New York City and on Maryland's eastern shore, from which its officials were ejected in late December as punishment for Moscow's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Then President Barack Obama said December 29th that the compounds were being used by Russian personnel for intelligence-related purposes and gave Russia 24 hours to vacate them. These are the Russian government's playpens here in the United States. They are luxury retreats where Russian diplomats play tennis, swim, and sail, and apparently plan their attacks on American democracy. The other big breaking news story tonight in the investigation involves Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who famously told Senator Al Franken in his confirmation hearing that he did not have communications with the Russians during the Trump campaign. Jeff Sessions gave that testimony under oath. Senator Al Franken will join us tonight, and we'll get his reaction to a new report that congressional investigators and the FBI are investigating another possible meeting between Jeff Sessions and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, a meeting that the Attorney General has never revealed and did not reveal in his corrected testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee. The FBI is looking into whether there was an additional private meeting at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. And earlier today, NBC News learned that former FBI Director James Comey is expected to testify in public next week after having been cleared to testify by Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. The Wall Street Journal reports that James Comey is expected to testify that President Donald Trump asked him to back off the investigation of former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, according to a person familiar with the matter. The special prosecutor is expanding his staff now to include an expert on foreign corruption. Bloomberg reports that Andrew Weissmann, the head of the Justice Department's fraud section in the Obama administration, will join the special prosecutor's staff of attorneys. According to Bloomberg, Weissmann's specialties have included corporate wrongdoing and foreign corruption. Weissmann also previously worked for Mueller as the FBI's general counsel from 2011 to 2013. The House Intelligence Committee approved 4 subpoenas today for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and one of Michael Flynn's businesses, as well as a subpoena for the president's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, and a subpoena for Michael Cohen's business. The Republican and Democratic leaders of the House Intelligence Committee said there was bipartisan support in the committee to vote to approve the issuance of those subpoenas. Joining us now, Evan McMullin, former CIA operative and a former independent presidential candidate. He is the co-founder of Stand Up Republic. Also with us, Mika Owyang, a lawyer and former House Intelligence Committee staff member and the vice president of the National Security Program at the Third Way, and Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning opinion writer for the Washington Post, joins us tonight. He is also an MSNBC political analyst. And Gene, I want to go first of all to what could be the Trump administration reward to Russia, giving them back their playpens on Long Island and on Chesapeake Bay, where President Obama said they actually used those facilities not just for recreation, but in those facilities, part of the planning of the interference with our election took place. You would think that a Trump administration sensitive to appearance would say, well, no matter what we think of the merits of the case, we can't give those things back. It will look bad, but apparently there seems to be no inhibition about that in the Trump White House.
Apparently no inhibition. I mean, one understands why Ambassador Sergei Kislyak would want his dacha back, or his dachas, right?
Yes.
He would love to have them back. But this administration seems incapable of that sort of reflection and that sort of calculation of risk-reward. And as a result, you know, the story like this comes out and once again creates yet another cloud of smoke that signals to people looking at Russia, the Russia issue, that there must be a fire someplace. They keep doing this, and I don't quite understand why.
Evan McMullin, when a sanction like this is imposed, and this was part of the package of sanctions, in order to relax it, in order to give them back, you would presumably have to have gotten something from the Russians or some kind of corrective in Russian behavior for that to happen. What has the Trump administration gotten from the Russians?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I think Eugene provides a very good analysis under traditional terms. You know, what has happened here that would justify the return of these properties? But I'll tell you that we're in non-traditional times. We're in uncharted waters here. I would propose that there is a reason, probably a well-thought-out reason, that the Trump administration wants to return these properties. I don't think it's a good reason. I think it's the type of reason that warrants an investigation. But clearly, the Kremlin has leverage of some kind or heavy influence of some kind over this administration, and you're seeing evidence of it in this story.
Mika, when looked at from Moscow's side of this, if Moscow really does want influence with the Trump administration and it wants to kind of get away with using that influence, wouldn't they say, you know what? Keep the villas for this summer. We'll somehow survive because we don't want it to look like we own you.
So I think that the Russians would be more clever than the Trump administration if that's what they're saying to them. I mean, it seems very simple. If Trump believes that the Russians actually helped him win this election, then this is their reward for doing so. But if Trump is really the defender of the Constitution and the defender of the American electoral system, then he should be wanting to punish the Russians for their interference, not just against Hillary Clinton, but against other Republican candidates, and stop them from doing it again. But that he gives it back now, it really looks like a reward to the Russians for helping him across the finish line.
Yeah, and Eugene, that's the question that Adam Schiff asked tonight in a tweet. Why reward them? And it's not clear that we're going to ever get answers to that now that basically communications about this are being kind of shut down within the Trump White House. Things are getting referred to lawyers and all of that sort of thing. As the subpoenas start to fly, we talked about this last night on this program, that Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's lawyer, refused to cooperate with the committee. And so the next stage is, of course, he gets hit with subpoenas. And now we're seeing Michael Flynn and Michael Cohen faced with this decision about how do they comply with these subpoenas.
That's right. And, you know, one wonders if they will comply fully with the subpoenas, and if not, what further steps are available to the committee and are taken by the committee. Meanwhile, the big investigation, the serious investigation, Robert Mueller's investigation continues, and will clearly want to look at and talk to and examine records from these individuals as well as others. But the point that you just raised, though, is the Russians are sophisticated about this sort of thing, right? So I wonder why they didn't just say ixnay on the villas, or perhaps they did, and the Trump administration made these preliminary moves to give them back anyway. It's all very strange, and you have to wonder: is it that unsophisticated, or are they that beholden to the Russians?
Mika, I want to talk about the subpoenas specifically issued to Michael Cohen, because he might have an attorney-client privilege claim on some of the matters that are subpoenaed. But a lawyer does not have an attorney-client privilege claim if the lawyer himself or herself is engaged in criminal conduct or suspect conduct. That claim won't survive under those kinds of circumstances. So what are you expecting to see in the execution of those subpoenas against Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's personal lawyer?
Right. So I think that they might have this attorney-client privilege issue, except that you have to look at the time frame in which they are asking for his information. If it was a time when he was on the campaign as a staffer there and not serving as Trump's lawyer, then you don't have that privilege defense, and they can ask for documents. Or if he is serving the corporation, a corporation doesn't have a Fifth Amendment right to hold back the documents, and so they could be asking for the documents there too. But what the subpoenas really show is that the House is working working very hard to get their investigation back on track.
Evan McMullin, I want to go back in time a little bit to a report that came out about a secret recording that was made of a meeting that you were in when you worked in the House of Representatives, and it showed Kevin McCarthy last year in a meeting of House Republican leadership talking about the idea of Russian influence, and he said in that meeting that he believed that, to quote him from the tape, he said, "There's two people I think Putin pays, Dana Rohrabacher and Donald Trump." Their defense on that was that, oh, he meant it as a joke. When you heard it in that room, did it sound like a joke to you?
No, not by him. I mean, there was a lot of laughter in response to what he said, but he didn't mean it as a joke. But there were, maybe some chuckles in there, as I recall. But they're the kind of chuckles that you make when you're talking about something that's so uncomfortable and so serious that it's all you can do to try to deal with it. So it's just one of those things. We've all had conversations or all said tough things in situations where the way we act about it is, perhaps a bit uncomfortable, and that's how I would describe it. And
he immediately followed it up, according to the transcript, in the face of those chuckles, with an insistent "I swear to God." It read to me like he was trying to emphatically be serious about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people laughed, and he was trying to make the point that, there was something there, I thought.
In your experience, is that generally the way people with the doors closed in the Republican meetings in the House of Representatives talked about Donald Trump and the campaign?
That conversation stood out, but I will tell you that that House Republican leadership understood that Russia presented a serious threat to democracy, both here in the United States and in Europe. And they saw the threat emerging here, and understood Donald Trump's strained relationship, understood as far as they could with Vladimir Putin, or understood that it was unhealthy. And unfortunately, they decided that instead of opposing him, they were going to ultimately get on the Trump train. And that's highly disappointing, and I think we need to expect more and better from our leaders.
Gene Robinson, there may be finally someone closing in on the Trump tax returns. Politico reporting that the special prosecutor does have the legal authority to obtain those tax returns in his investigation. And so Donald Trump must be pondering tonight just how wise it was to send his administration down a path that led to this special prosecutor.
Well, obviously, it was unwise. Robert Mueller, if you look at his career and his reputation, he's nothing if not thorough. So I doubt seriously that he'll just go for 1 or 2 years worth of tax returns. I think he'll go back. I think he will look at corporate subsidiary, corporate entities, all these companies within companies that Trump has. But step back for a second, Lawrence. All that news that we've had in the last 5 minutes, these days, this is just like Wednesday, right? I mean, this is just a day. It's kind of like that. It's really quite an extraordinary moment that we're living through, and it's exhausting. But I have a feeling it's going to be this way for a while as this story comes out.
And Mika, we're going to have an extraordinary day of news next week that we'll all be covering and discussing. Apparently, James Comey's testimony as early as next week. And what do you anticipate will be revealed in that? Do you think we'll actually see, or the committee members will see, the notes that he took about those conversations with the president?
So they may see them in closed session. I think there's a real question about whether or not the public will get to see them. But you'll see the members questioning him about these interactions with Trump, which may or may not lead up to obstruction of justice, where Trump is asking him to go soft on Flynn. And
Mika, quickly before we get a break in here, what do you suppose were involved in Comey's discussions with the special prosecutor about his Senate testimony upcoming. What does it mean to say that the special prosecutor cleared him to testify to the Senate?
So I think that the special prosecutor needs to know what he knows in advance, just to make sure that there's no information that special prosecutor might want to hold back for a criminal case, and also perhaps to look at it for questions of executive privilege, other reasons why such testimony might not be okay, classified information, things like that.
Mika Ouyang and Eugene Robinson, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.